To the public, Diana's jewels glittered under palace lights, but inside royal walls, every necklace, ring, bracelet, and tiara carried a message. Some pieces showed loyalty, others showed pressure. And some, once worn by Diana, became impossible for anyone else to touch without consequence. Diana understood that better than anyone expected. At first, the jewels seemed like part of the fairy tale. Diamonds for banquets, pearls for ceremonies, tiaras for the nights when the monarchy wanted the world to see perfection. But as the years passed, those pieces began to change. They were no longer just royal decorations placed on a young princess for tradition. They became part of her language. When Diana wore pearls, they could feel soft and graceful, but also guarded. When she chose something bold, it could feel like a quiet act of resistance. When she appeared in inherited pieces, the palace saw duty. The public saw beauty. But Diana often carried something heavier beneath the sparkle. That was the secret hidden in plain sight. In the monarchy, jewelry is never random. A brook can signal favor. A necklace can suggest acceptance. A tiara can announce position before a single word is spoken. The right jewel can tell the world that a woman belongs. The wrong absence can tell the world she has been pushed aside. And Diana lived inside that silent code every day. Every appearance was watched. Every choice was studied. Every stone resting against her skin seemed to ask the same question. Was she being celebrated, controlled, or displayed? Behind the glamour was pressure. Diana became one of the most photographed women on earth, but the more the public adored her, the more dangerous her image became inside palace walls. Her jewels followed her through joy, heartbreak, motherhood, loneliness, and defiance. They were present when she looked like a perfect princess. They were also present when the cracks began to show. That is why, after her death, those pieces did not feel neutral anymore. They carried memory. They carried pain. They carried the unbearable reminder of a woman the crown could not fully contain. And that created a problem no palace official could easily solve. How could the monarchy honor Diana without allowing her memory to overpower everyone who came after her? How could another royal woman wear a piece linked to Diana without being compared to her instantly? How could the crown bring those jewels back into public life without reopening grief, anger, and suspicion? So the solution became silence. Certain pieces were separated from ordinary royal use. Some were kept private. Others were quietly frozen in storage, protected not from thieves, but from reaction. Because once Diana wore them, they belonged to more than the family. They belonged to the public imagination. And nobody inside the palace wanted to be blamed for placing that emotional weight on another woman. But the question remained, sharper than ever. Who had the authority to decide which pieces could return, and which ones had to disappear? And then came the decision that royal watchers still whisper about the quiet sealing of the pieces nobody has seen since Diana. This is where the mystery becomes impossible to ignore. Insiders claim several pieces connected to Diana were removed from ordinary royal circulation after her death. Not lost. Not forgotten. Not destroyed. Locked away because each one carried a story the palace could not safely retell. The palace could explain many things with tradition. It could explain why one tiara was worn at a banquet and another stayed behind. It could explain why pearls passed from one royal woman to another, why diamonds appeared on state occasions, why certain heirlooms belonged to the crown and others remained private. But after Diana, explanation became dangerous. Because the jewels connected to her were no longer simple treasures. They had become emotional evidence. Each one seemed to hold a fragment of her life. The young wife trying to belong, the mother protecting her sons, the woman learning to stand apart from the system that had once defined her. That is why the unseen pieces matter. They were not hidden because they lacked beauty. They were hidden because they carried too much meaning. Some were private gifts, wrapped in memories the palace could not control. Some were transformed jewels, changed from one form into another, carrying the quiet suggestion that Diana had tried to make royal tradition fit her own life. Others were pieces loaned under rules that were never meant to become public debate. Then there were the sentimental jewels, the ones linked not to grand ceremonies, but to personal pain, family tenderness, or moments when Diana's public smile could not fully hide what was happening behind palace doors. Those pieces were the most dangerous. Not because of their price, not because of their stones, but because of what people would remember if they ever appeared again. If a later royal woman wore them, the world would not simply admire the diamonds. It would ask why that piece had returned. It would ask who approved it. It would compare the new wearer to Diana before the palace had time to shape the story. Every headline would become a question. Was this tribute, replacement, or erasure? Was the monarchy honoring Diana, or quietly taking back what the public still believed belonged to her? That fear settled over the vault like a warning. Certain pieces could not be placed on Camilla without reopening the wound of betrayal. They could not be placed on Catherine without turning admiration into comparison. They could not be passed casually to another royal woman without making Diana's absence feel even louder. The palace understood that the wrong jewel at the wrong moment could do what no interview, no book, and no scandal briefing could do. It could bring Diana back into the center of the monarchy. So the vault became more than a room for treasure. It became a holding place for unresolved grief, a silent chamber where memory was preserved, controlled, and politically contained. Inside that silence, Diana remained powerful. Her jewels waited in darkness, not forgotten, but watched. Because every hidden piece carried a question the crown was not ready to answer. And among them, one was said to be feared more than the rest. But one jewel, according to palace whispers, caused the deepest fear not because it was the grandest, but because it belonged to the part of Diana the monarchy never managed to control. Every royal woman can inherit diamonds, but not every woman can inherit meaning. The most dangerous Diana-linked piece was not simply locked away because it was beautiful. It was locked away because placing it on another royal would have looked like an act of erasure. That was the fear at the heart of the vault. Not theft, not damage, not even scandal in the ordinary sense. The palace feared the emotional judgment of the public, because this one jewel had become too closely tied to Diana's identity. It did not merely remind people of royal duty. It reminded them of a woman who had smiled through humiliation, carried herself through heartbreak, and still emerged in the public mind as something larger than the title she was given. To place that jewel on another woman would not have looked like tradition continuing. It would have looked like the monarchy trying to take Diana's meaning and hand it to someone else. That was impossible. Camilla could never wear it. The reaction would have been brutal, instant, and unforgiving. No palace explanation could soften it. No careful statement about heritage or continuity could make the public forget what Diana had represented, or what Camilla had come to represent in the most painful chapter of that story. One familiar stone, one remembered setting, one silent echo of Diana against Camilla's name would have turned into a national wound all over again. Catherine faced a different danger. She was admired, disciplined, and carefully positioned as the future of the monarchy. Yet even she could not escape Diana's shadow. If that jewel appeared on her, the headlines would not simply praise elegance. They would ask if Catherine was being shaped into Diana's replacement. They would compare every gesture, every choice, every emotion. What should have been a tribute could become a trap. The palace knew that affection for Diana was not gentle nostalgia. It was fierce, protective, and still full of questions. Other royal women faced the same invisible wall. The jewel had become untouchable because it no longer belonged only to records, wills, or vault inventories. Legally, it may have belonged to one place. Emotionally, it belonged somewhere else entirely. It belonged to people who remembered Diana not as a royal asset, but as a wounded woman who turned pain into presence. And that kind of ownership cannot be signed over. It cannot be reassigned by a private decision behind palace doors. That is why the jewel stayed hidden. The real fear was never the object itself. It was what the object could awaken. Grief, anger, loyalty, accusation. The public might see it and remember not the monarchy's strength, but its failures. They might ask why Diana's symbols were allowed to shine again only when Diana herself was gone. So the palace chose the safest kind of control: absence. No new wearer, no public explanation, no official ban, just silence deep enough to become a rule. But silence has a cost. Inside the family, hiding a jewel does not erase its value. It only makes the question of inheritance more dangerous. Who should receive it? Who should protect it? Who has the right to carry something the public still believes belongs to Diana? And once inheritance entered the room, the vault stopped being only about memory. It became a battlefield between bloodline, duty, and control. After Diana, the question was not only where the jewels went. It was who had the right to claim them. Her sons inherited her memory, the crown guarded its image, and the palace quietly understood that some treasures could divide the family more brutally than any public statement. That was the painful truth behind the locked boxes and careful silences. Diana had not left behind jewels alone. She had left behind symbols of motherhood, heartbreak, loyalty, and survival. To the world, those pieces belonged to her story. But inside the family, they became something even more fragile. They became reminders of the woman William and Harry had lost, the mother whose absence shaped their lives long before either of them fully understood the cost of royal duty. For William, Diana's jewels carried the weight of the future. He was not only her son, he was the heir moving toward the throne, the one expected to protect the monarchy even when parts of that same monarchy had wounded his mother. Any Diana-linked jewel connected to his side of the family would instantly become part of the crown's next chapter. It could be seen as honor, continuity, and healing, but it could also look like the institution reclaiming Diana through the very bloodline it needed to survive. For Harry, the meaning was different. Diana's memory was more personal, more openly painful, and more difficult to fold neatly into royal strategy. A jewel tied to him would not simply be a family keepsake. It could become a statement. It could suggest that Diana's emotional legacy lived outside the strict control of the palace. And that was dangerous, because the monarchy has always feared symbols it cannot manage. So the inheritance became delicate. Some pieces, insiders believed, were separated into private family memory. Others were placed under a heavier silence, kept away from public use because no choice around them could remain neutral. If one branch received a jewel, the other might see rejection. If a piece appeared on Catherine, people could call it destiny. If it remained unseen, people would ask what the palace was hiding. Every option carried risk. That is what made these treasures so explosive. They were small enough to fit inside a box, but powerful enough to expose old wounds between brothers, fathers, wives, and the crown itself. A necklace could become accusation. A bracelet could become proof of favoritism. A ring could reopen questions nobody at the palace wanted spoken aloud. And as William and Harry's paths moved further apart, the hidden jewels seemed to carry even more pressure. The vault was no longer simply guarding diamonds. It was guarding grief. It was holding back family pain and forcing it to obey royal strategy. The pieces remained unseen not because the palace had forgotten them, but because returning them could make the fractures impossible to hide. But the deeper the family divisions became, the more dangerous one question grew. Were the jewels hidden to protect Diana's legacy, or to protect the crown from it? The monarchy survived Diana once, but it never stopped fearing her shadow. Every time the public saw a young royal woman wearing jewels, the comparison returned. The palace knew one wrong diamond, one familiar necklace, one emotional echo could create a second Diana overnight. That fear shaped more decisions than the public ever understood. Diana had become more than a former princess. She had become a symbol of beauty under pressure, warmth inside a cold system, and pain that millions felt personally. Her jewels carried that power. A necklace she once wore could instantly pull people back to her struggle. A bracelet could remind them of her motherhood. A tiara could awaken the old question the palace never fully escaped. Did the crown protect Diana? Or did it break her? That was why the hidden pieces were so dangerous. If Catherine wore one, the world might call it touching, but the palace would hear something sharper beneath the praise. People would not simply see Catherine, they would see Diana's face behind her. Every smile would be compared. Every public gesture would be measured. Every headline would ask whether the monarchy had found a new woman to carry the old wound beautifully and silently. What looked like tribute could become a prison. And the crown could not risk that. Catherine's role had to feel steady, modern, and controlled. She could honor Diana carefully, but she could not be swallowed by her. The palace understood that affection can become expectation, and expectation can become punishment. Diana had taught them that love from the public is powerful, but it is never fully obedient. Camilla's position was even more fragile. Certain jewels connected to Diana could never come near her without causing outrage. No explanation about royal ownership would survive the emotional storm. The public would not see history. They would see injury. They would see a woman once blamed in Diana's heartbreak wearing symbols tied to Diana's life. That would not look like continuity. It would look like conquest, and even the strongest palace machinery could not polish that into acceptance. So silence became the safest strategy. If the jewels never appeared, no one had to explain why they were chosen. No one had to defend who wore them. No one had to admit that some pieces were too loaded with grief, loyalty, and anger to be treated as normal heirlooms. The vault protected the monarchy from comparison by removing the objects that could trigger it. But silence never destroys meaning. It only buries it deeper. The palace wanted to honor Diana without letting her rule the present. It wanted her remembered, but not powerful enough to unsettle the future. It wanted tribute without surrender. Yet the more carefully those pieces were hidden, the more people began to wonder why. A jewel that disappears can become more famous than one worn proudly. A missing necklace can create more suspicion than a public appearance. A sealed box can start louder rumors than an open display. And that was the danger the crown underestimated. Hidden things attract attention. Absence becomes evidence. Silence becomes a confession in the public mind. And as the palace tried to bury the meaning of those pieces, royal watchers began noticing the absences that no official statement could explain. Royal watchers are trained to notice glitter, but the real clues often come from what never appears. Year after year, certain Diana-linked pieces stayed unseen. No anniversary tribute. No state banquet return. No careful reintroduction. Just silence, and silence inside the monarchy is rarely innocent. At first, the absence could be explained away. The palace always had options. There were enough diamonds, pearls, brooches, and tiaras to fill a lifetime of ceremonies. One missing piece did not immediately look like a secret. It looked like choice. It looked like timing. It looked like the normal rhythm of royal jewelry, where some heirlooms appear often and others rest unseen for years. But then the years kept passing. Major occasions came and went. Royal women stepped into public life wearing carefully chosen pieces from the family's collection. Tributes were made. Signals were sent. Memories were honored. And still, the most sensitive Diana-linked jewels did not return. That was when royal watchers began to notice the pattern. They watched state banquets, weddings, memorial events, anniversaries, diplomatic receptions, and family gatherings where a single jewel could have carried enormous meaning. They looked for the quiet nod to Diana that never came. A familiar necklace. A remembered bracelet. A piece that could have said she was still part of the royal story. But the palace seemed to avoid the strongest symbols. It chose safer echoes, softer references, pieces that suggested respect without reopening the wound. That kind of restraint told its own story. Because inside the monarchy, absence is rarely empty. When a jewel stays hidden once, it may be coincidence. When it stays hidden again, it becomes caution. When it disappears across generations of carefully planned royal appearances, it begins to look like a rule nobody is willing to say aloud. Public memory became the palace's problem. Diana's admirers did not forget what she wore. They remembered the pieces that moved with her through her most admired and most painful years. They remembered the jewelry tied to motherhood, independence, heartbreak, and survival. And with every new royal appearance, the question returned, why this jewel and not that one? Why this tribute and not the piece everyone remembers? Why does the palace speak of honoring Diana while keeping certain parts of her story locked away? Jewelry experts and royal insiders began to read the silence like a coded message. Some believed the pieces were under informal restriction, not officially banned, but quietly considered too dangerous for public use. Too emotional, too recognizable, too close to Diana's pain. No palace memo needed to exist. The rule could live in hesitation, in careful advice, in the simple understanding that some boxes were better left unopened, and that made the vault's silence louder than any denial. The palace did not have to admit anything. It only had to keep choosing other jewels. But every avoided appearance became another clue, another unanswered question, another reminder that Diana's memory still had the power to unsettle the crown. But the most emotional consequence was not public suspicion, it was what those hidden jewels revealed about how the monarchy handles women who become more powerful in memory than they ever were in life. In the end, the most dangerous thing inside the royal vault was not gold, diamonds, or pearls. It was memory. Diana's jewels carried something the palace could not polish away. The reminder that one woman had captured the public heart more deeply than the institution that tried to contain her. That was the truth the crown could never fully escape. Jewels can be locked behind doors. They can be placed in velvet cases, moved into private rooms, renamed in records, or kept away from public view for decades. But meaning does not obey locks. Meaning follows people. It lives in memory. It returns every time a name is spoken, every time a photograph is remembered, every time the public asks why a certain piece has never been seen again. Diana's hidden jewels became symbols of controlled grief. The palace did not destroy them. It did not openly reject them. It simply kept them still, and that stillness said more than any statement ever could. It suggested that her story remained too painful, too powerful, and too politically dangerous to touch without consequence. The monarchy could manage ceremonies, titles, processions, and official tributes. But Diana's emotional legacy moved differently. It did not wait for permission. Each unseen piece became part of a larger wound. One jewel represented love that turned into duty. Another suggested motherhood protected under pressure. Another carried the weight of betrayal, silence, and survival. Together, they formed a secret archive of everything the palace preferred to soften. They were not just treasures. They were reminders that the royal image can look eternal while the human heart beneath it breaks. That contrast made the mystery sharper. Diamonds can last for centuries, but reputation can crack in a single moment. Pearls can be restrung, but public trust is harder to repair. Gold can be polished, but old pain does not shine on command. The palace may have believed that keeping these pieces hidden would prevent scandal. Instead, the silence made them more powerful. The less the public saw, the more it imagined. The longer the jewels stayed away, the more their absence became a story of its own. And Diana's memory did not remain trapped in the past. It continued shaping every royal woman who came after her. Catherine could be praised, but also compared. Camilla could be accepted by some, but still shadowed by old wounds. Younger women entering the royal world could be styled, protected, and guided with Diana's fate always hovering nearby. Her story became both warning and measure. She was gone, yet she still influenced what could be worn, what could be said, and what had to remain hidden. That is the final revelation. The vault did not erase Diana. It preserved her power in secret. Every locked box became proof that the monarchy still feared what her memory could awaken, not because the jewels themselves could speak, but because the public would speak for them. And somewhere inside that silence, the question grows darker. If these pieces were hidden to protect the crown, what else was placed beside them? What other jewels carry names, wounds, promises, and betrayals the palace has never dared to reveal? And that is why the question still haunts the palace. If these pieces were only jewels, why has nobody dared to bring them back? The royal vault may be guarded by locks, records, and silence, but its true protection is fear. Fear of comparison. Fear of betrayal. Fear that one glimpse of Diana's forgotten jewels could remind the world of everything the monarchy survived and everything it never answered. That is why opening the vault again would never be a simple act. It would not be only a matter of choosing a necklace, lifting a tiara, or allowing a bracelet to return for a formal occasion. It would mean reopening Diana's story in full. Not the softened version. Not the carefully managed tribute. The real story. The one filled with beauty and pain, devotion and distance, public love and private suffering. The hidden pieces remain powerful because they connect all of those emotions at once. They shine, but they wound. They honor, but they accuse. Any future appearance would become instant news. The public would study every detail. Who wore it? Who approved it? Why now? Why this woman? Why this occasion? A single jewel could bring back decades of grief in one moment. It could turn a celebration into a reckoning. It could force the palace to explain choices it has avoided for years. And the crown knows that once the questions begin, they do not stay polite. That is what makes the silence so revealing. On the surface, it looks like control, a careful decision, a strategy to avoid emotional damage. But beneath that strategy is something much closer to confession. If the jewels were harmless, they could return. If they were only beautiful, they could be worn. If they were only royal property, the palace would not hesitate to use them as symbols of continuity. But they remain unseen because their meaning is unstable, too emotional, too personal, too tied to Diana's life, her suffering, her motherhood, and the public loyalty that never faded. So the vault stays closed. Perhaps the monarchy is waiting for another generation, one far enough from the pain to handle the jewels without setting off old storms. Perhaps it believes time will soften the reaction, that the names, betrayals, and accusations will eventually lose their edge. But Diana's memory has never behaved like ordinary history. It does not fade on command. It returns whenever the palace tries too hard to move past it. And that is the final danger. The unseen jewels may only be part of the mystery. The vault may still hold pieces the public has never heard about, pieces tied to private promises, broken trust, hidden arrangements, and moments too sensitive to record openly. Somewhere inside that silence, royal history is not sleeping. It is waiting, because inside the monarchy, The most dangerous secrets are not always the ones buried forever, they are the ones waiting for the wrong person to open the right box.